Okay, next I want to talk to you about the minimum wage laws. Now, there's a lot of information about the minimum wage laws in the news. So I think the first thing we should talk about is, where did we get these minimum wage laws? How did they start? And the minimum wage laws were created because a special interest group, this is typically how all laws are created, a special interest group started lobbying Congress to create minimum wage benefits. And that special interest group was unions. Why would the unions be seeking for a minimum wage when the union workers are already getting paid very high wages? Well, what they wanted to do was to make it so that employers could not hire less skilled workers without having to pay a higher wage. They didn't like the idea that women and minorities were coming in and taking their jobs. You see, if you're an employer and you can hire 2 people for less than the price of one, and they can do 1.5 times as much work as the one, not as skilled, but they can do 75% each, you're going to hire the 2 workers. But if you have to pay a higher wage than the 75%'s worth, then you won't hire them. So the unions came up with this idea, and the idea was to make it difficult for minorities and for women to get into the workforce and to take away their jobs. So the stated goal of the minimum wage is to create a livable wage level for people so that they'll have enough money to be able to live. Well, for some people, that's not really an issue. Students, for example, are not trying to make a livable wage. They're just trying to make some money while they're going to school. And there are other people who are in that kind of a position. Unfortunately, they still fall under the minimum wage laws. And so what happens is this creates a barrier for many people to be able to get into the workforce initially. Who does it hurt the most? Turns out it hurts African American teenagers. African American teenagers have the highest unemployment rate, and it's very difficult for them to get into the workforce. They haven't developed the skills, and so they can't be justified in hiring them at the minimum wage. So who supports the minimum wage law? Well, today it's progressive politicians who are seeking to get votes. It's unions, again, trying to keep unskilled workers from certain jobs. And unfortunately, it's being supported by those who think that they're going to benefit from getting a higher wage. But those are the very people who suffer, because if those laws pass, they're the ones who won't get the job. In fact, they'll lose many times the jobs that they have today. So let's consider the market for labor. Now, with a graph of the market for labor, we have a demand for labor, and the demand for labor is from firms that are trying to hire workers. So the demand for labor is the firms, and the supply of labor are people who are offering themselves as an employee. They're trying to supply labor to that workforce. And the quantity of labor would be the same as it would be on a regular supply and demand curve. This would be the supply that people are offering for labor. But what is the price of labor? Price of labor. Well, the price of labor is wage. So we use a lowercase w for wage, the price of labor, and we can create a supply and demand curve for labor. Now, what if the minimum wage is put on this supply and demand curve, but the minimum wage falls below the market wage? What impact will that have on employment? Well, the answer is no impact at all. It will have no effect. But if we move the minimum wage above the market wage, now we've created a floor that's above the market wage that says everybody has to make at least this amount. So what will happen to the market for labor? Well, what we will see is that the supply of labor will increase. At that wage, more people want to work. And so there will be more labor available. So we'll have a large supply of labor. But at that higher wage, many employers will decide they don't want to hire people, and so the demand for labor will go down, and what we will have then is a surplus of labor. Now there's a name for the surplus of labor, and that name is unemployment. That's what we call it in today's market. Well, one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves, based on things we learned earlier in the semester, is elasticity of the supply and demand of labor. So it turns out that the supply of labor is fairly elastic. People will come and go from the labor pool. But demand for labor is very inelastic. So if wages go up or forced up, in the short run, people may not lose their jobs. The McDonald's still has to have a certain number of workers. People still have to maintain the people that they have working for them in order for their business to continue on. However, we've learned that goods or services are more elastic in the long run than they are in the short run. So that means that in the long run then, the higher minimum wage will result in more loss of jobs. So the question is, why would the long run make a difference in labor? And the difference is that substitutes can be found. We've talked about this before. One of the things that makes things more elastic in the long run is that you have time to find substitutes. Well, then the question is, what is a substitute for labor? What is a substitute for labor? Oh, yes, technology, right? So firms with time will be able to find a technology to replace the workers. So this is why when we go to the grocery stores now, we see more and more self-help stations for checking out. Why people can pump their own gas at gas stations. They found technology to replace the workers that used to have those jobs. And so this is what happens in those cases. Let's talk for